Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started as people are joining. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining Rural Sourcing's Agile Minds webinar series today. We're going to have a conversation around building and nurturing high-performing teams. We have an amazing group of panelists joining us today. This is a group of principal consultants from product management, engineering, and quality practices at RSI. These panelists have more than 15 years experience building, creating, and testing software products in many different industries and working in really diverse team shapes and sizes. So I'll be facilitating an open conversation with them today. These panelists will share their perspectives, insights, tools, and practices. And so let's begin with some introductions. Again, I'll be acting as the moderator for today's discussion. My name is Beth Jagodinsky, and I lead our product strategy practice at RSI. I've been a product leader and practitioner for the last decade and feel passionate about building customer-centric products. I'm going to turn it over to our panel of experts to introduce themselves so you guys can get to know us. Let's start with Ryan.
Hi, my name is Ryan Finco. I'm in the product strategy group, principal in that group with Beth. I've been at RSI about 10 years. Prior to that, I've built teams and run projects at numerous companies. And it's going to be fun to be here. We're going to have a great conversation. With that, I'm going to pass this off to Toyia.
Greetings, I'm Toyia Smith, and I'm a principal consultant here as well at RSI. On the team with Beth and Ryan, we have a great time. I too have been in the product industry or so many different facets of the PMO world, project, product, program, but building high-performing teams and wonderful products for clients around in an array of industries as well. So excited to be here with you guys this afternoon, and I'm going to kick it over to Matt.
Hi, my name is Matt Wanke. I'm a leader and practitioner here in the quality practice at RSI. I've been helping teams build higher quality software for the last 15 years. In addition to my quality roles, I've also assisted team development as a Scrum Master and an Agile coach. I recognize that great teams function better, solve complex problems rapidly, and release more often with fewer problems. High-functioning teams benefit the team members and the business. They produce things of genuine value, and they do so in a sustainable way. Happy to be here for part of this conversation, and I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Aaron.
Hi, my name is Aaron Kohlbeck. I'm a principal consultant, just like everyone else on the panel here. I am in the development/engineering practice, primarily focusing in the .NET and Microsoft space. I've been a developer for over 20 years now, been part of many different teams and many different aspects of developer, tech lead, team lead, app dev manager, filled in as a Scrum Master every once in a while, depending on the need of the teams, and have been a number of many high-performing teams and not so high-performing teams. So I feel like I have a pretty good perspective on that sort of stuff, just like everyone else on here. And that's me. And I think we've got a pretty high-performing team here on our panel. So I can kick it back to Beth, though, to get us started.
Beth, you're muted.
Thanks, Ryan.
No problem.
All right, thanks everyone. So for those joining us today, feel free to use the chat box for comments or questions. We're going to reserve about 5 to 10 minutes at the end of the webinar. We'll have a chat for about 30 to 35 minutes to ask your questions to these panelists. So we're going to get started, and as we kick off, I really want to set the stage for the topic of conversation. We're going to focus on the skills that really foster trusting relationships in order to create an environment of empowered, high-performing product development teams. We're going to be talking about things like interpersonal communication, establishing an environment of trust, which are foundational to a healthy team dynamic. I'm going to ask the panelists as well to give some real kind of tangible takeaways that you can start using with your teams. Again, this group of panelists bring a really unique perspective, having been part of so many different teams and industries of all shapes and sizes. So they're going to share their insights and what they believe and have seen before as far as results for high performance. Our collective philosophy at RSI is we know a healthy team will help you build better products, which positively impacts your bottom line. For example, when a team can move quicker because their communication is clear, they can release more often, get features to customers quicker, and then businesses will realize that value sooner. All of this contributes to business growth. And so this is why this is important for us to have this conversation today, and I'm excited to unpack this with this team. So let's get started. I want to start by asking the question and just put some definition around a high-performing team. Ryan, let's start with you and kind of how you might describe this, and panelists, feel free to chime in on that as well so we can kind of frame what this means for us.
Sure, thanks. So high-performing team, the question is, what does it mean to be high-performing? And one thing Toyia is going to also talk about at some point is the idea of what's the bar of performance. But when you think about what a high-performing team is, how is it different from a regular team? And one thing to start with is to think about what kind of team you want to form. And what I mean by that is the idea of, I'm going to use an analogy, it's the idea of a baseball team versus a basketball team. A baseball team is a collection of individuals whose score sort of in aggregate is what causes the team to be considered good or high performing. A basketball team, which is really closer to how software is done, is really done in an interpersonal relationship. They have one common goal that they're all moving towards, and it's something that has to be done as a collective to some degree. So that's why you'll see often in baseball teams, they'll have lots and lots of superstars and the team gets better and better. But when they try that in basketball, the team often gets worse because it's about a collective singular effort that you're driving towards. So one of the things about high performing teams is to understand what kind of team are you trying to create, or what kind of team are you working with? Let me give you an example. A software team is probably closer to a basketball team than a baseball team, but a departmental team might be closer to a baseball team because you're working on, different things coming together, and your, individual contributions are, like I said, an aggregate score to that. So one of the first things to think about is what kind of team are you forming? So with that said, what does high performing mean? And there's a lot of different things out there about what high performing means, but what you can think of is a team that collaborates effectively, that communicates effectively with each other, has I'm going to talk about in a little bit, something called a collective intelligence, and they utilize that collective intelligence to solve divergent, difficult problems. That's a high-performing team. Now, we're going to get into what some of those words mean, but I'm going to kind of pass this back over to Beth a little bit here, and we can kind of keep going, but I wanted to set a tone.
Sure. Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, I know a number of those kind of themes you've touched on. I want to specifically touch on collaboration and kind of how that actually surfaces and what kind of practices mean, or maybe an analogy around that. Matt, would you mind kind of expanding a little bit on collaboration?
Yeah, collaboration is incredibly important for high functioning teams. You can assemble a group of rock stars, but if they're not able to work together and collaborate and move towards that common goal, they're never going to be high functioning, right? Ryan kind of touched on the basketball example there a couple of times. You'll see teams like the Lakers, they try and stack their roster with all of the league's superstars in an effort to win the championship. And quite often those teams don't get there because those superstars are used to being a superstar and kind of running the show. When you put them all on the court together, they can't achieve that common goal. So collaboration is incredibly important.
Absolutely. Yeah. I would say coachability is another thing that's a key component to high performing teams. Can the individuals on the team be coached? Can they receive feedback? Can they give feedback? Both are very important in driving a team's performance. I find that the more coachable a team is, and from giving and receiving feedback, the better they perform together, and they're able to grow and learn each other and bring this this idea of being authentic into a teaming environment so that they can thrive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great point, Toyia. And I think, that's the ideal state to get to that. But, a lot of times that doesn't just start without intention and being able to be really specific about how those practices form. Erin, would you mind kind of chatting about ways that we can do that or where to start as far as a team perspective goes?
Sure. So to kind of jump back to like the basketball, baseball team thing, an important thing is your team size. So I'll start there. And I would very much love to say the ideal team size is 6 people, but I can't do that because that's not true. It's generally a smaller team, 4 to 8, say that, right, as a good range of people. Once you go too small, people can start to feel isolated and not like they're a part of a team. If you go too many people, people can then feel like they're not a part of a team as well, right? But there's what can happen then as well too is that there are too many channels of communication that can happen, right? There are too many people that I might need to talk to on the team to find out some information. And it's been proven that bigger teams don't work better, don't get things done faster than small teams. So finding the right size is important, but there's not a hard and fast rule for how many people, right? That's something you just got to kind of figure out. But 4 to 8, right, is a generally accepted range.
Just to add to that a little bit, you talked about it a little bit where you were mentioning about like team size and that 4 to 8 and like the communication channel. The reason why I want to talk a little bit more about that communication channel dovetails a little bit into what I had mentioned earlier, which was the idea of I use the word collective intelligence. And this all sort of is a web. It all dovetails with itself. Like everything is dependent on everything else. There's no linear path to making a great team. So we're going to be divergent in our conversation here, but that idea of collective intelligence is sort of the fancy term. So you can Google it, you can use that. It's the term for that X factor, that like what makes that team so shiny, what makes that team like so capable. Like what they found that through emotional connection, interpersonal relationships on the team, which I dovetail with Erin's because it only forms when you have small enough communication channels. And if you have too many communication channels, you can't form that. You can't get that interpersonal relationship with everybody on the team. You get schisms, you get teams within teams. But if you can form that interpersonal relationship, and it's more than just like telling a joke every once in a while, but you start believing in each other, you start trusting each other. When you can form that, that's where collective intelligence surfaces. And this is what they found in all the studies, that these teams that can form interpersonal relationships with each other get that collective intelligence, that's X factor of being a great team.
Yeah, I really like what you said there, Ryan.
You can like what Erin said too.
I did. I like what Erin said too. But it's creating space to build relationship. That's what you're saying. Is you have to have time and space to build relationships, to build teams. It is very important. I know we're all busy. We have projects that have deadlines. We have things that need to be done, but to do them and do them well, and to create a team that's performing for a long period of time, where you can go through highs and lows of the product timelines, project timelines, where things are working and not working, and have a team that can move through all those different phases. You have to have a team that knows each other, that works well together, that's not afraid to communicate with each other. And you only develop that by developing some form of relationship. And that requires a certain amount of authenticity and transparency. And so you have to create environments where people feel safe to be authentic and transparent with each other, so that they can grow together and develop and feel free to communicate who they are, how they feel, what they think, without fear of not fitting in or or not being accepted. So it's creating an environment where people feel accepted and that they can trust so that they can put valuable input into.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I wanted to add one thing. I didn't mean to cut you off. I apologize. But just to build on that, one of the things that helps form a lot of the things we're talking about in that collective intelligence is various forms of diversity, and not just diversity in a cultural way, not just diversity in a racial way, but like, how do people think? So cognitive diversity, where do people come from and their backgrounds? These are things that allow for some of that interpersonal relationships to start to exist. Like, you start exploring each other a little bit more, and that's just going to cause a team to be stronger and stronger over time.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And that will definitely create that environment of trust so that people can feel good.
I love that environment of trust. I think that's foundational to build into those environments where you can be vulnerable. You can talk about a problem you're having, and being able to kind of raise your hand right away without fear. So I'd love to hear, practices, or where can people start to maybe continuously improve their current environment? Maybe they're joining a new team. What are some real kind of takeaways, or what can they use to actually facilitate this, or kind of gain alignment as a team on how we might behave?
So I can jump in here with something that I feel is very important for new teams, or people joining teams, to help build that area of trust with each other, right? And that's work agreements. And so it's a very formal sounding thing, right? But it's just an arrangement, it can be documented however, right, that the team decides, but it's a way of establishing the expectations for the way the team and the members are going to interact and communicate and behave around each other, right? Because if we're part of a team, and I know Toyia won't be available from 1 to 2 on Tuesdays, then I'm not going to try to talk to her and find and schedule meetings at that point in time, right? Because I know she won't be able to make it. So maybe as a team you decide, we're not going to have any teams or any meetings from 1 to 2, right? And so when you're building these work agreements with your team, it's you do it early on in the formation of the team. You get everyone involved as well too. It can't be just dictated to the team from someone. You need to have everyone involved with coming up with whatever the agreement says, because that way, if the 5 of us sit down and come up with our agreement and we all agree on it, then we're all going to abide by it, and we're all going to live with it, right? We're going to have buy-in to it. If Ryan comes in and says, this is the way the team is going to work, we're going to be like, no, that's terrible. I can't do that, sort of thing. So that's a really good way to start, is by coming with those agreements. And so, I know I've used them in the past. I know other members here. So, I don't know if someone has examples of things that their work agreements were that maybe they want to share.
One thing I wanted to chime in a little bit on working agreements is and I've seen working agreements from when I've gone and coached and helped companies and things like that, where the working agreements were very, very formal, and they were really almost more like a communication plan. Don't be afraid for them to get a little emotional, like to think about, like, how do you have conflict on your teams? Like, how do people think and talk and feel? Because that's really what's going to drive that interpersonal thing. And again, it all dovetails. It all just keeps coming back on itself. And it's not necessarily about, like, they're important, but those specifics, like 1 to 2, absolutely important kind of thing. But like, how do you talk to each other? What's considered respectful? Those are things that I see missing a lot, because people are hesitant to kind of get personal, but teams have to get personal.
Absolutely. Especially when you're working with each other for a long period of time. It's important to establish how often are we going to communicate, not just something that I find have to been very helpful so far with my time here at Real Sourcing is we have how are we going to debrief? How are we going to talk to each, are we going to talk every day? What time of day works for everyone? If there is a conflict, just like what Ryan said, how are we going to approach it if we don't agree? How are we going to approach a problem? How does escalation work on our team? Let's just agree to it, because and talk about it and get it out there in the open so that everyone feels comfortable. This is what we agreed on. It makes things so much easier when those types of problems do arrive.
Yeah.
Yeah, debriefing and constant communication are incredibly important, right? And in agile software development, you have, your retrospective and your daily stand-ups, but it really goes beyond that, right?
Yes.
The highest functioning team I was on, we had those things, but we also went to lunch regularly. We had some of that work time and that non-work time. We had always on video meetings where folks could kind of just drop in and swarm on work that they're doing, or rubber ducky and get input from other folks on the team. And quite frankly, sometimes the conversations weren't work related, and that's okay, because it helped kind of the team gel, and we became incredibly high functioning.
Yeah. Matt, I like your point there, because we can't just tell a team, trust each other. We really have to nurture an environment. I think a lot of that's based on credibility, reliability, coming with empathy, because, the teams that I think we're talking about, these are not teams that didn't have stresses and challenges or deadlines. There were a lot of pressures. And I think what it comes back to, when that trust and vulnerability, those open lines of communication are there, we can more easily problem solve and work through things that are, urgent or important or stressful. So that brings up a good point. I'd love to know, just on, the social contract or the working agreement, or maybe, the teams that you're currently on, what are some things, just from a more tangible, like real life examples, what are some things that are working well, or maybe some learnings that the teams that you've been on recently, that you've, maybe made a continuous improvement on, and you're seeing kind of that come to fruition? If anyone can chime in on some of those real life examples, I think that would be helpful for our audience.
Yeah, I think so. For me, for the current team that we're on, it's getting better at swarming and asking for help when you need it. Folks would have a tendency to kind of go heads down, and they'd come up 3 days later, and progress hadn't been made, and it's like, well, what's going on here? And getting folks together in a room to kind of help solve that problem. And it took some work to get the team used to that. Several folks really hadn't worked in that way before.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, for me, it is debriefing and having a constant Zoom available for, let's jump on Zoom. It's you don't, not always having to find a link, having one just posted in whatever team, if you have Slack or Teams that everyone has access to, that you can just go there any time of the day. We're a remote world here at RSI. So having a Zoom constantly available just to go in and chat about anything at any time is a time saver and a great collaborative tool that we use. It works well within my teams.
Yeah. One thing just to follow up on, and this is something that, I run into a lot, is now that we are mostly a remote world out there, and especially in the software industry, video on is really important. You need to be able to see people's, micro expressions. You need to be able to see people's eyes. You need to be able to see, to form and bond, you have to have that visual component. And you also have to think about the fact that if you want to show things more and you want to show your expressions more, you're gonna have to exaggerate them a little bit. And the reason why is because the frame rates don't match life. And so like little tiny imperceptible nods that you would see in person, like you can't see those on video. So just remember, if you want to encourage certain behaviors and you want to see things, make sure people can see, which means you're going to feel a little exaggerated, but it's what's going to come across in that video format. And it's just a really important thing. Also, make your channels, if possible, private. And I know leaders out there are probably pushing back on me for saying this a little bit, but as a leader, one of the things I do is I like to get a private channel for my team so that they can feel safe with each other and they can feel free to say things. If you've ever been in a channel and no one's saying anything, go and look at who's in that channel. Like, and there's something to be said for that. That means that you have to trust people, and you have to trust that they're going to be adults and they're going to have conversations and they're going to work things out. So give them that privacy. I think it's really important.
Great point. Very good point.
Yeah, I was just involved with our junior associate program here at RSI, which is internship, whatever you want to call it, that sort of thing. Taking people that are either recently graduated or about to graduate. And I had to work through a lot of this with them because they hadn't been involved in teamwork of this magnitude. That's maybe not the right word, but they had projects that they had done during school with maybe a partner or something like that. And all of a sudden we were on a team of 14 people, which I will say was a bit large. It's outside of that range. And everyone's schedule was mostly non-compatible because of people who were still in school or all sorts of other stuff. So one of the first things we had to do was create the working agreement. And basically it was, here's when we can schedule meetings, right? Was the first thing we had to decide. And then we created an always on Zoom for them. And I didn't have access to all of them. I was their lead, but making sure that they had that space where they could go in and just talk about whatever was really beneficial to them, for sure, because they learned to rely on each other to solve problems, to work on problems together without necessarily immediately coming to me as the lead, which was a really, really great thing to see, especially with people who hadn't really had that experience before. So it was, that was one of the very big benefits too. I had to fight the video on thing with them pretty much the entire time as well too. And what I had to do as a lead was model that behavior for them though, was making sure that I had my camera on all the time. And even if I was the only person in like a 6-person meeting with my camera on, I made sure it was on and they could see what I was seeing. And then as time went on, more and more people would turn their cameras on, and it was great to see, but I didn't feel like I needed to mandate it, right? I just wanted to say, hey, turn your cameras on at the beginning and then model the behavior. So
Erin, you bring a great point on, modeling behaviors. I think we touched a little bit on feedback and giving fluid feedback. I think along those lines also comes with, recognition and praise and being able to kind of freely not only give feedback, but also recognition for, different behaviors or things that are working. Does anyone want to talk about what that means or in practice and why that's important for teams?
I can start since
Great.
I was just talking. But yeah, as far as feedback and praise and rewarding people, it's very important, right? Because as a team member, I want to make sure people are recognizing and see my contributions to the team, right? I don't want to feel like I'm just sort of toiling away in the hinterlands on something without anyone, seeing me. The sort of reverse of that though is that the feedback or praise should be sort of commiserate with the level of effort that's done, right? If I do something good, I get an attaboy or whatever, that's great, right? I shouldn't expect a party thrown because I got my work done for the sprint or something like that, because it's not genuine at that point, right? And the people will feel that ingenuineness about the response, and they will respond just as poorly to that as they will to like no praise. So that's an important aspect to feedback and praise for
I wanted to piggyback on that a little bit, just because you said a couple things I think are pretty important around, how do you give praise? How do you, and I've seen praise become divisive. I've seen praise break teams, believe it or not. And how do you give praise without people feeling, slighted in some way? Well, one of the best, there's sort of 2 rules that I've kind of lived by. One of the first ones is be specific in your praise. If I say, Toyia, you did great. Okay. The rest of the team doesn't know what great means. They don't understand. They were like, I did great. Why did Toyia get called out for being great? And so you're going to create a divisive nature in a team when you do things like that. So what you want to do is you want to say something more along the line of like, Toyia, when that stakeholder was saying some things that was kind of pushing us into a corner a little bit, you spoke up and said some really great clarifying statements that really helped us out. Now the team understands what somebody's being praised for. They understand the behavior that you want to create and you want to foster. It's really an important component about giving praise. So if you're going to give praise, and you should, make sure it's specific so that people can understand it, and then people don't get divided by it. Because what will often happen is the rest of the team will chime in. The rest of the team will be like, yeah, you did a great job with that, and I really admired how you turned the conversation around, et cetera, et cetera. And all of that, again, going back to that web, everything's interconnected. All of that is just creating more interpersonal relationships. That's so it's that cycle.
And I just wanted to add too, is that recognition is a way people are seen. And everybody wants to just feel heard and feels, and be seen in some type of way. And so understanding that, being able to be empathetic, or I know that was hard. It doesn't have to always be praise. It can be recognition, can be, I know that was challenging, or I know that was a difficult thing to do, or great, or thank you for showing up today. I know you're dealing with a lot. It doesn't have to be because they accomplished some great task. It could just be that you're seeing them deal with life, or you're seeing them deal with the work that they're having in a way that they just feel seen, that they're able to, thank you for whatever, Gratitude is a big deal. Being great, expressing gratitude for individuals, for your teammates, for how they're showing up, what they're doing, and how they're doing it is always going to win. Is always a win for you. Yeah.
Great. We've gotten a couple questions come in, so I'm going to start with asking a couple of those. One of these is around what metrics do you use to measure a high-performing team? I think this can be a tough one. So I think the natural thing is velocity. So what else, or maybe added to that, how can we start to know the impact or know that the behaviors we're doing is a positive result to the product or to our business goals and customer? Would love to hear insights from the panelists on that.
One way that I've seen is, and it's interesting that the word metrics was used, because velocity, absolutely. Also, high performing teams usually have higher quality. So you can look at your quality metrics as well. And I know Matt can speak to that probably far better than I can. But one that I don't know how much of a metric it is, but it's something you can watch as a leader, which is, how does the team deal with ambiguity? Higher functioning teams deal with ambiguity better. They are able to take that collective intelligence I talked about and apply it to divergent problems and figure things out. So higher functioning teams probably need less guidance. They're able to sort through things easier and faster. So again, all goes to that, how quick can you release, this kind of thing. So that element is important. I mean, I see somebody, said self-organization, absolutely, and self-determination. And those are going to be, things that you see. So when you see that team and they have that collective intelligence, you're going to see, ambiguity doesn't frighten them as much. Right. And I found that to be a kind of a big indicator. Another small metric, a small indicator, is how often do they talk without a formal meeting being put on your calendar? Like, do you go into your Zoom room or whatever you have set up, or your chat room, and they're just chatting with each other, or is it silent unless a meeting is put on the calendar? I found high functioning teams voluntarily communicate, and they've communicated in a synchronous way.
That's a good point. I think also is how quickly they respond to each other. You put a question out, high performing teams, they are in tow. It's like, throwing the basketball and someone catching it. it's a way that they kind of operate and kind of move together. So I think that's a great metric as well.
Mhm. Great. Excellent. Another question here. What is the biggest impediment that you have faced within one of your teams, and how did you resolve it? Maybe sharing a real life example. I know we kind of talked on some of those ways that you've had continuous improvement, but if anyone wants to chime in on maybe a challenge they've overcome or worked on with the team, I think that would be helpful to answer this question.
I could go. I was just waiting. I'm like, oh, somebody's gonna go. There's a lot of them, obviously. One I'll bring up is conflict resolution. When people don't see eye to eye with each other, what have they been trained all their life? What have they been trained professionally? And becoming part of a high functioning team, driving towards that collective intelligence, driving towards that true self-organization, that means you got to break out of your comfort zone a little bit. And that means now you're going to have conflict. Now you obviously want it to not be personal conflict. You want it to be like healthy conflict, but fear of conflict and getting people to understand how each other can conflict with each other and how it's not personal and how you just kind of got to get all that on the table. It's kind of like, there's some long times there sometimes to get people to trust each other, but that conflict has to be not only okay, but it also has to be kind of commiserate. It has to match, and everybody has to understand how each other conflicts on the team. I found that that's a difficult one because we all have lives and we've all been alive for a long time kind of thing before we were on this team. So how do you get that to sort of match with that diversity we were talking about earlier?
I would say too, I think one of the things that I've realized is that teams are just a group of people, and people come with issues, with problems, with issues from their last job, from issues with their families. You're dealing with the whole person. You're not dealing with just the stoic individual that's showing up from your team. And when you recognize this and you provide an environment that is available for people to grow, thrive, and heal, healing organizations is a real thing. Healing teams is a real thing. This person had this horrible experience in their last team. Now they're on your team. And they're kind of expecting things to be like their last team, and being able to create an environment where people can go, you know what, this is going to be a positive experience. This is going to be a positive environment. This is going to be a thriving environment. Setting the intention and the groundwork for that is so important and can be transformational, not only for your work, but for that person's experience at work. And so, I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Toyia. And I also want to touch on and maybe get your thoughts that this doesn't have to be a specific role doing these things. Yes. This can really be facilitated with anyone on the team. And stepping out in kind of that, it might be a vulnerable moment for that team to start, but those compound over time and really create positive impact. So I would just encourage, and I know kind of on behalf of these panelists, this can really be anyone starting these behaviors.
Yeah, it's a super good point. I mean, we've talked about it before, and I've talked to everybody on this panel about it before, but the work is there whether somebody is assigned to it or not. And so there's a vacuum formed and somebody needs to step up to that. So it's not a question of this was assigned to you. It's a question of how does your team sort of start to be organic, and somebody steps up and will often kind of like fill that role. And if somebody doesn't, that's a problem. Somebody needs to, like, kind of thing. And it's not an assigned thing, it's an emergent thing.
Great.
Another question here is just any resources, books, maybe people to follow, or topics just to kind of learn more. I think we I know have touched on a lot of different concepts, And many of you have done a lot of learnings over the years. Is there anyone to kind of go follow or books that you might recommend for our audience?
I happen to have one here. I just finished a book club here. I have a small team that, I have direct reports that we just finished The Ideal Team Player. Amazing, just in way of understanding teams and who you're working with and how to work together. I found it to be a great resource. So that's one I'll throw out there.
Yeah, Patrick Lencioni's great. I would probably say out of all of his books from a team perspective, my choice is is 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. It's really powerful. It's not full of jargon. It's full of very good, solid things that you can do tactically with teams to understand why they're broken down and how you can potentially fix it. But yeah, that's Ideal Team Player is very good too.
On the communication front, Radical Candor by Kim Scott.
Ooh, good one.
Really good read.
Yeah.
Well, one of the other resources we touched on was team working agreements. I know we've, kind of used different templates at RSI and formed our own. This can be something just for our attendees that on Miro or different platforms that you can kind of absorb and then cater to your specific situation or build upon. I think this is also something that can be revisited as teams change. Change we know is inevitable. So just another resource or tool that you can begin using at any point, even if you're midway through, your product or been working on a team for a year, there's always space to use that.
Revisit your agreements. Don't
Often, yeah.
revisit them. And also keep this in mind, particularly if you're in leadership out there kind of thing, and you're like, hey, these are good ideas. Let's, because you do have to get people together to have a session around working agreements and things like that. They're going to take what they take from a time perspective. Like, so just know that, like, there's going to be an organic quality to it. And like, you might not be able to box it into an hour kind of thing. You might not be able to box it into 2 hours. The team's going to get things out. They're going to understand each other. Let them do that. It's important. And I know it's a time thing, but it's a valuable way to move forward.
Wonderful. We have just a few minutes left. I'd love to open it up to the panelists on any kind of parting words of wisdom, tips, things you want to emphasize.
Hey, Beth, I was seeing there's a Q&A from someone named Stacy.
Oh, yes. Related to ambiguity, what's your favorite tactic for dealing with team members that want all the details before they can get started, or use not having enough info, or get used to not having enough info to get started as an excuse? Good question.
Yeah.
I saw that. I was thinking about that one.
Thanks for attention.
Because that, as a developer, that happens a lot to us, where we have a user story in our Scrum board and not all the details are there. And maybe the person that can answer it is out for the day, but we want to get started. The way I've worked with my team members on that is I tell them, you have to take an iterative approach to your development, right? You have to build something that beats the bare minimum of what you understand, with the realization that you're going to change that very soon. And you have to be okay with that change. You have to realize that things are going to be different once you learn more about it, right? And that can be a hard thing for people to grasp, right? They want to know everything, and they want to build it right the first time and then never have to come back to it again. And for me, it's like, it's always been, let's iterate. We're going to make everything better. We're going to start here and then work our way up, right? And so that's the way I approach it with my team members, really.
And let's be realistic, right? Even if we're in like the perfect waterfall world and we gather all of this information up front, the reality is once you start building it and you start getting it into the hands of people that are using it, it's going to change anyway, right? So you need to have enough to find up front to at least get started, to start moving forward, but you're never going to have it fully designed and fleshed out up front. It's just not realistic.
Mhm.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, you can only move based upon the information that you have at the time. But at any given time, more information may come to change your mind on how you're working, what you're doing, the solution, even the vision. Companies will have a certain vision, and then something will happen and that will shift, and that's okay. And so it's maintaining the idea that things will shift you, the concept of the product that you're building may shift and change, and that's okay, and encouraged.
Yeah.
One,
I want
You
to
know-
add one thing if I
Go
can,
ahead.
but
Go
just
ahead, Ryan.
because it dovetails right with what Toyia was saying. One thing also is that I found around ambiguity with some people is that they're afraid to be wrong. And you have to give people permission, just like permission to have conflict. You have to give people permission to be okay with being wrong. It's not a bad thing, like kind of thing. So, people that won't make a decision are locked into this analysis paralysis because they don't want to be wrong, because they don't want to take that risk. You've got to make that environment open enough that somebody can be wrong without judgment. And then you'll find that ambiguity is less frightening for people.
Yeah.
That is so true. Good point, Ryan. It's so important that people know that, it's okay to be wrong. And that's why this whole webinar about building teams and creating safe spaces is so important, because the more people are okay with being wrong, the more they're okay with just taking chances at different solutions that may or may not work, that may be completely wrong, but at least they've grown just a little bit more together as a team to make a better solution the next time.
Yeah, I love those points. And I think the other thing I know in a working agreement I had is when we were jumping into ambiguity is just setting the stage for, we will, we'll refine things or work on things that are 50% refined and 50% we still need to figure out. Just being okay with not having all the answers and setting that behavior as kind of, this is what we're expecting because this is complex. Is something else, just to acknowledge that amongst the team.
Yeah.
I know we're over time, and I want to thank the panelists for all of your insights. Thank you, especially to our attendees for joining us. We hope that it was a great session. Thank you for giving us your time and joining us for this conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Have a great
you.
day.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, guys.